Welcome to Nightmare Lullabies. Here, we bring you chilling tales to keep you on edge while helping you unwind. If you enjoy our stories, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Got a creepy story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We might feature it in a future video. Now sit back, relax, and let the story begin. The Cold Case of Christiane Heiser, a tragic mystery in Belgium. On November 12, 1992, growing concern among the friends and classmates of Christiane Heiser led to a chilling discovery that would leave a scar on the quiet student community of Brussels. Christiane, a bright and ambitious 21-year-old economics student, had not been seen or heard from in days. For 3 consecutive days, she failed to attend her classes at the Université Libre de Bruxelles, an uncharacteristic absence for the dedicated and disciplined young woman. For days earlier, Christiane had mentioned to a close friend that she was feeling under the weather. She had reassured her friend that she just needed some rest and planned to stay in her small studio apartment on campus Irene V, a student residence in the bustling capital city of Belgium. But after that brief conversation, all contact ceased. Calls to her phone went unanswered, and attempts to visit her apartment were met with silence. Her absence began to weigh heavily on her classmates, who described Christiane as someone who would never disappear without notice. One classmate, growing increasingly uneasy, decided to check on Christiane in person. Arriving at her studio in the mid-morning hours, they knocked repeatedly on the door. The silence from within was deafening. The door remained firmly shut, and there were no signs of movement inside. Anxiety turned to dread as time passed with no response. Fearing that something terrible might have happened, the student made the critical decision to contact local authorities. Shortly after the call, the police arrived at the campus Irene V complex, accompanied by the building concierge and a team of firefighters. It was now approaching 12:45 p.m., and the group prepared to force their way into the studio. Using tools to break the lock, they entered Christiane's small, 21-square-meter apartment. What they found inside would not only shatter the lives of her family and friends, but also haunt investigators and the community for decades. The cozy and modest apartment, meant to be a haven for Christiane during her studies, had become the scene of an unthinkable crime. Bloodstains marked the floor, painting a grim picture of the violence that had unfolded within its walls. The tension grew as the group moved cautiously through the studio, eventually arriving at the bathroom door, which was locked from the inside. With their hearts pounding, the officers forced the door open. Inside the small, dimly lit bathroom, they discovered Christiane's lifeless body. She was lying unclothed on the floor of the shower, surrounded by a pool of blood. A plastic bag had been placed over her head, further intensifying the horror of the scene. The sight was brutal and heartbreaking, leaving no doubt that the young student had met a violent and untimely death. As the reality of the discovery sank in, the once bustling student residence fell silent, gripped by shock and fear. The promising life of Christiane Heiser had been stolen in an act of horrifying violence, and the search for answers was only just beginning. A scene of horror. As authorities stepped cautiously into Christiane's modest 21-square-meter studio on campus Irene V, they were met with a deeply unsettling sight. The small apartment, which should have been a quiet refuge for the young student, bore the unmistakable marks of violence. A large pool of blood stained the floor near the living area, evidence of the gruesome attack that had taken place. Officers quickly moved to the bathroom door, which was locked from the inside, their sense of dread growing with every moment. When the bathroom door was finally forced open, the scene inside was even more horrific. Lying on the floor of the shower was Christiane's lifeless body, a sight that would remain etched in the minds of everyone present. She was unclothed, her body surrounded by a pool of blood, and her head was encased in a plastic bag, tied tightly at the neck. The use of the bag added a chilling element to the crime, raising questions about whether it had been used to asphyxiate her or as a grotesque attempt to dehumanize the victim further. The brutality of the attack was immediately apparent. Christiane had been stabbed 33 times, likely with a large kitchen knife, though the murder weapon was nowhere to be found. The stab wounds were concentrated on her torso and upper body, indicating a frenzied and deeply personal attack. The sheer number of wounds suggested a level of rage and violence that was difficult to comprehend. Despite the viciousness of the attack, investigators quickly noted that there were no signs of sexual assault, a detail that only deepened the mystery. If the crime wasn't motivated by sexual violence, then what could have driven someone to commit such an atrocious act? As they searched the studio for clues, they discovered that Christiane's keys and wallet were missing. This raised the possibility of a robbery gone wrong, but the theory didn't quite fit. There were no signs of forced entry into the apartment, and the killer had left behind other valuables, including her stereo and personal items. The missing items, her keys and wallet, took on an ominous significance. Investigators began to wonder whether the killer had taken them as trophies, a macabre reminder of their crime. Alternatively, it could have been an attempt to cover their tracks, using the keys to stage a later break-in, or disposing of the wallet to mislead authorities. These unanswered questions only added to the growing enigma of Christiane's murder. Adding another layer of strangeness, the shower where Christiane's body was found had been partially rinsed, as if the killer had tried to wash away evidence. However, the attempt was sloppy and incomplete, leaving behind a trail of blood that investigators hoped would yield critical forensic clues. The killer's actions suggested a mix of planning and impulsivity, someone who might have thought about aspects of the crime in advance, but was ultimately overwhelmed by the violence of their act. The combination of the locked bathroom door, the plastic bag, and the frenzied stabbing left investigators baffled. Was this a calculated murder with a specific motive, or an explosion of violence stemming from a chance encounter? The lack of clear answers haunted the team as they began the painstaking task of piecing together the events leading up to Christiane's final moments. For those who knew her, the thought of Christiane suffering such a fate was almost unbearable. She had moved to Brussels full of hope and ambition, ready to start a new chapter in her life. Now her bright future had been extinguished in an act of unimaginable cruelty, leaving behind a chilling crime scene and a host of unanswered questions. Who was Christiane Heiser? Born on June 3, 1971, in the bustling industrial city of Esch, Luxembourg, Christiane Heiser was a beacon of promise and positivity. Raised in the nearby town of Fotz, she grew up in a close-knit family alongside her parents and younger brother, Claude. From an early age, Christiane stood out for her bright personality and boundless energy. Her family fondly recalled her as a curious and adventurous child who approached life with enthusiasm and a radiant smile. Christiane's teenage years were marked by a love of music and sports. She had an ear for melodies and often found solace in her favorite songs, while tennis provided her with an outlet for her competitive spirit and love of physical activity. Balancing her studies and hobbies with ease, she was admired for her discipline and determination, traits that would later guide her as she pursued her academic ambitions. At 19, Christiane took a bold step that revealed her adventurous side. She participated in a year-long school exchange program in the United States. This experience broadened her horizons and left a lasting impression on her. The opportunity to live in a foreign country not only deepened her independence, but also fueled her passion for learning and exploring the world. Upon her return to Luxembourg, Christiane began to consider her next steps, carefully weighing her academic and professional goals. In the fall of 1992, Christiane embarked on an exciting new chapter in her life. She enrolled at the Université Libre de Bruxelles, ULB, to study economics, a field that perfectly matched her analytical mind and ambitions. Choosing to study in Brussels was not a decision made lightly. While she had initially considered moving to Scotland for her studies, the idea of being closer to her family ultimately won out. Her parents, relieved that she wouldn't be too far from home, supported her wholeheartedly. Finding housing in a new city, however, proved to be a challenge. After some searching, Christiane secured a modest studio apartment in the Campus Irina V residence, a student housing complex in the heart of the Belgian capital. The building housed many other students, including several from Luxembourg, which made the transition to city life a little easier. The 21-square-meter apartment was small but functional, with a kitchenette and private bathroom, a space she quickly made her own. Her move to Brussels was filled with the promise of new beginnings. Christiane was excited to immerse herself in university life, make new friends, and pursue her dreams. Those who knew her described her as approachable and warm, someone who could light up a room with her presence. Though she had only been in Brussels for 5 weeks, she had already begun to settle into her routine, balancing her coursework with time spent exploring the vibrant city. Sadly, her dreams were cut short before they could fully take shape. On November 12, 1992, just over a month after she had moved to Brussels, Christiane's life came to a brutal and untimely end. Her murder shocked the community and devastated her family, leaving behind not only heartbreak, but also an enduring mystery. The memory of Christiane Heiser remains etched in the hearts of those who knew her. She was more than just a victim of a senseless crime. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a young woman with a bright future ahead of her. Her story is a poignant reminder of the fragility of life and the devastating impact of violence, resonating far beyond the walls of the small apartment where her life was tragically taken. A case without answers. When police arrived at the crime scene in Christiane's small studio apartment, they sealed it off immediately, determined to preserve any potential evidence. What followed was a thorough and methodical investigation. Forensic experts meticulously combed the space, collecting DNA samples, fingerprints, and any other trace evidence that might provide clues about what had transpired. Every corner of the apartment was scrutinized, but as days turned into weeks, no clear narrative emerged from the evidence collected. Investigators turned to the people in Christiane's orbit for answers. Her neighbors and fellow students were interviewed extensively, but no one had seen or heard anything suspicious. That night, most of the building's residents had attended a welcome party for new students, held just across the hall. Christiane had chosen to stay in her apartment, perhaps still feeling unwell. Despite the proximity of the gathering, not a single person reported hearing screams or disturbances. It was as if the brutal crime had unfolded in complete silence, hidden from the world. Theories began to emerge. Could Christiane have surprised an intruder mid-burglary? Was this a planned attack, and if so, why her? Or, most disturbingly, could the killer have entered her apartment by mistake, targeting the wrong person? This last possibility gained traction when it was discovered that the apartment's previous tenant had been involved in the local drug scene. Could the killer have been seeking revenge, only to find Christiane instead? These speculative questions only deepened the mystery and highlighted the lack of concrete evidence. Despite their best efforts, the police could not piece together what had happened that fateful evening. The absence of witnesses, combined with the limited forensic tools of the early 1990s, made progress painstakingly slow. The investigation began to stall, leaving behind a haunting vacuum of unanswered questions. A web of false leads. Over the years, the case saw a revolving door of suspects, each more promising than the last, only to be ruled out as investigations progressed. The homeless man. One of the first suspects was a homeless man who had reportedly been seen sleeping in the hallway of campus Irina V, near Christiane's studio. The man's behavior drew further suspicion when police discovered he had been collecting newspaper clippings about the murder. Was this an unhealthy obsession, or was there a darker reason for his interest? Investigators interrogated him and took DNA samples to compare with the evidence from the crime scene. Despite the circumstantial oddities, the DNA results did not match. Without a genetic link to the crime, the homeless man was ruled out as a suspect. Christiane Heiser. In 1993, a year after Christiane's murder, another student was brutally killed under chillingly similar circumstances. Inga Wetterluz, a 24-year-old woman living in Leuven, was attacked in her studio apartment, stabbed multiple times in the shower. A crime eerily reminiscent of what had happened to Christiane. The perpetrator, Christiane Heiser, was caught and confessed to Inga's murder. Heiser was also revealed to have stalked female students in the area, compiling thousands of photographs and personal details about his potential victims. Among his belongings, police found a disturbing document detailing his methods for attacking women and ensuring he left no evidence behind. Given the striking similarities between the two cases, police turned their attention to Heiser, suspecting he might also be responsible for Christiane's murder. However, DNA evidence from Christiane's crime scene did not match Heiser, and he denied any involvement. Critics of the case have questioned whether errors in early DNA testing could have led to his exclusion, but no direct evidence has ever tied Heiser to Christiane's murder. other notorious criminals. Over the decades, several high-profile serial killers and violent offenders have been linked, at least in theory, to Christiane's case. Among them were Ronald Jansen, a Belgian teacher who later confessed to multiple murders, and Michel Fourniret, a notorious French serial killer known for targeting young women. Both men fit the profile of someone capable of such a brutal crime, but as with the other suspects, DNA evidence cleared them. Raphael Vinck. In 2000, Raphael V., a man convicted of murdering a French student in Tournai, came under scrutiny for his potential connection to Christiane's murder. Vinck admitted that he had lived in and around Brussels for several months after the crime. Investigators believed they might have found a new lead, but once again, DNA testing ruled him out. With each suspect eliminated, the case became colder, and the frustration of investigators grew. The fact that Christiane's murder remains unsolved despite so many avenues of investigation is a painful reminder of how elusive justice can be. Unresolved and haunting. The brutal murder of Christiane Heiser remains one of Belgium's most haunting cold cases. Nearly every investigative lead has resulted in a dead end. DNA evidence, once a beacon of hope, has paradoxically been both a crucial tool for ruling out suspects and a source of frustration for its inability to identify a match. Critics have questioned the handling of the case, particularly in its early days, wondering if oversights or errors in forensic analysis might have hindered the search for justice. For Christiane's family, the decades since her death have been a long and painful journey. Her parents and brother were forced to endure the unimaginable grief of losing their daughter and sister in such a violent and senseless way. Compounding their pain is the lack of answers. Questions about who killed Christiane and why remain unanswered. Christiane's death stands as a stark reminder of how fleeting life can be and how violence can shatter even the most promising futures. She was a bright young woman with dreams and aspirations, loved by everyone who knew her. The tragedy of her loss has left a scar not only on her family, but also on the larger community. Final thoughts. More than 30 years later, the murder of Christiane Heiser continues to cast a long shadow over Belgium. The case serves as a chilling example of how even with modern technology and advances in forensics, some crimes remain shrouded in mystery. Was Christiane the victim of a random act of violence, or was there a more sinister and targeted motive behind her death? For now, these questions remain unanswered, and justice remains elusive. The passage of time has not dulled the pain of her loss, nor has it extinguished the hope that one day, the truth will finally come to light.